All right. How's everybody doing today? It's going to be weird holding this, and not hearing myself more. So how many of you guys are PMs? Yeah? Maybe project managers? Maybe we go around and just ask what everybody is.
The head of customer success for a startup, and I'm transitioning to the product manager.
Into a product manager? Okay, cool.
I'm in software development, and then hopefully one day can transition into product manager, project manager.
Okay, awesome.
I'm in the product management / business intelligence role at a services firm.
That's great.
I work in product support at an ad tech company.
Okay.
I'm
Well,
a designer.
product designer. Okay, awesome. Back there.
I'm program manager, sort of, at HR.
Okay, perfect.
I'm media analyst, but it's one
Okay, perfect.
I did product management internships before, but now I'm working
In marketing?
in Morgan Stanley.
At Morgan Stanley. Okay. Okay. Well, so this talk is going to be about product management and continued learning. So we're going to talk about once you are a PM and kind of what you do to continue learning, but that can also be applied to the process prior to becoming a PM, and we can talk a little bit more about that too. So we can keep it open to what you guys want to know. So a little bit about me. My name's Yasi. I currently am a product manager at Sawyer, which is different than probably what was written in the event because my job has changed in the past 2-3 weeks. So to tell a little bit about my background, which might be helpful, is I spent 4 years in market research after college, and market research is large scale, qualitative, quantitative research studies, everything from surveys to focus groups to shop-alongs, and whatnot. I'm moderator trained, but mostly consumer products on that side. And then after that, I opened and ran the LA General Assembly. So I wasn't actually a student. And a lot of times people think I was, but I was in many ways a student because I was running a lot of the courses and the classes there. And that was a lot of, education management and program management specifically. And then I got my first PM job, my product job at Cornerstone On Demand, which is an HR software. So, I was there for about a year. And then I went to Originate, which is a software development agency. So I worked on a whole bunch of different projects, typically for large enterprise companies or startups that are well funded, typically by large enterprise companies. And then now I'm actually at a smaller startup here in New York called Sawyer. They provide a service for parents to be able to find educational activities for their kids. So that's a little bit about me. So what I wanted to start this conversation with is just, there's sort of 3 phases to being a PM. It's, first phase is learning how to be a PM, and then actually getting your job as a PM, being a PM, and then what happens next, right? So a lot of us, I found when I first got into product management and I sort of got in the groove of it, that at a certain point I was like, I don't feel like I'm really learning anymore. I learned a few things in the beginning so that I could get this job, but I'm not really, nobody's reviewing my work. I'm not really learning. And so this is sort of a talk about, what happens once you actually get a job and, what you can do to keep learning. So what I wrote is there's a drop off in learning for PM. So you learn a lot to get the job. It's usually a job transfer, industry change for a lot of people. You're learning how to, use your transferable skills, understand what the skills of the industry are, and then you sort of stagnate out, and then you actually start to, I feel get worse at what you're doing because nobody's reviewing what you're doing. And I'm sure, as you all know, the PM really sits in between all the other departments, and you're sort of the communication line, filling in all the gaps between marketing, design, engineering, QA, sales, data science, depending on what departments your company has. And there's typically a culture of learning new processes and work product review amongst the other disciplines, in particular for design and for engineering. So design is constantly having their work reviewed, typically by the PM and or by a design director, as well as by engineering. Their work is constantly on display. Engineering is also getting their work reviewed a lot by pull requests and code reviews. But as a PM, you're typically the sort of CEO of the project. Nobody's reviewing your work, right? You're the one reviewing everyone else. So how do you continue to learn as a PM? Everyone learns differently, right? Some people learn by reading, some people learn by watching, by listening. But I value learning by doing most, which I feel like maybe everybody who comes to these kinds of classes and these kind of courses also values. They're all really valuable, but I know a lot of PMs who spend most of their time reading blogs, and I am not that kind of learner. And so I find myself in situations where I'm like, I really want to learn about data analytics, but I don't want to read an article. I mean, I might read a few, but that's not really what's going to help me learn. So I've had to find creative ways to learn by doing when I don't necessarily have the opportunities available to me. So the areas of learning that I think about as a PM are, one, crossover skills. So we'll talk a little bit about that. Communication and negotiation, and the craft of product management. So these are the 3 buckets I think about as a PM. Crossover skills are basically, as a PM, you should have a minor or an expertise in something that isn't product. That's sort of how I've seen product most of my career, is that as a PM, they typically specialize in something, right? So they used to be an engineer, or they used to be a designer, or they used to be a salesperson, or maybe they came straight into product but decided to take a web development course or take a design course, right? So I think it's really important for PMs to specialize in something. So it's either research, design, marketing, sales, engineering, or data science. These are the 6 areas I feel like will be very valuable to you as a PM if you specialize in. So with crossover skills, I sort of bucket the learning styles into 2. Passive, which isn't necessarily bad, and active. So on the passive side, obviously we all know we can take online courses to help us with these crossover skills, as well as in-person courses like GA and product school. In particular, like on online courses, I feel like those are great for if you're trying to, gain an expertise in engineering, or you're trying to gain an expertise in design, but maybe not as helpful for things like sales or research, right? And then on the active side, what I tend to do mostly when it comes to crossover skills learning is identify and cultivate discipline mentors. So my number 1 way of learning is through mentorship. And mentorship is a very hard way to learn because you have to keep people in the loop and in the context. It's easy to get people's high level, advice, but it's harder to get them to actually teach you at the lower level. So we'll talk a little bit more about that later. And I always say find opportunities at work to help out in these areas. So I would say make it your, responsibility, make it known to everyone. The squeaky wheel gets the grease, right? So make it known that you want to have an opportunity to try this out. Maybe you do it and somebody else reviews it. Maybe you do it along with somebody, like, oh, they can do it. I'm just going to do it on the side. I'll do it at home and I'll bring it in and you can review it, right? So I try to find as many create those opportunities to test those skills at work. So if I'm, one of my crossover skills is design. So I will say let me design this as well. You design it, I'll design it too, and then you review my work too. And then work on side projects. And I'm sure you've probably heard this a lot. And side projects are probably one of the best way in product management, in tech in general, to show that you know a skill. And how do you do side projects? I typically just do a lot of consulting work. If a friend needs something, if my dad needs something, if I want to do design, I'll redesign my dad's website for him, So something like that where you can work on something on the side. It can be free or it could be paid, but try doing something on the side. And then I also teach classes. So I learn a lot when I teach, which needs you to obviously know a little bit, but you don't have to be an expert to teach. Frankly, if you're closer to the beginning of a process, you're probably much closer to how your students feel, or how the people who are learning from you feel. So it's actually very easy to kind of jump in and teach. And when I teach, I'm like, oh, I have to prepare for this class. So I really have to know what I'm talking about. And so it's a very different type of learning. So that's another great way. So I included this slide here where basically vulnerability is key. And I think it's an interesting topic that a lot of people don't talk about when it comes to learning. And how many of you know Brene Brown or have heard of Brene Brown? So I would say Brene Brown she's a shame researcher. And she actually does a lot of, she talks a lot about the workplace and shame and vulnerability in the workplace. So she's one of my, number one people that I go to read about and learn from as far as, being vulnerable, and vulnerability helps you learn from each other. So, like I said, finding opportunities at the workplace takes some vulnerability. You have to say hey, look, I'm learning this thing. Can I try it? Can I do it? Right? So I would say if there's anything that, I would recommend reading, it's definitely the Brene Brown books. So then the second category is communication and negotiation. So I think some people cross over this or don't think about this as much when it comes to being a PM. But for instance, at my last job, we did some negotiation training, which I didn't really expect to be doing as a PM, but it's really important. As a product manager, you're the one communicating between different departments. You're the one negotiating, right? Sales wants this, development wants more time, design needs more time. We need to have this done at a certain time. So you're constantly negotiating. So I would say focusing on this and agnostic of tech. It doesn't have to be a tech-focused class. And that's something I try to steer away from is gain insights from people who do this in other industries, in other areas, right? So on the passive side, I do a lot of teacher training courses to help me with negotiation and communication. One really great one is the Relay GSE, the Graduate School of Education, and they do a lot of classes on Coursera about communication and growth mindset and how to communicate and talk and negotiate with people. So those courses are really great. Personality science is also really important, in my opinion. It has helped me understand people in the workplace, helped me understand how to communicate better with them. In particular, I love the MBTI, but there are a lot of other indexes you can use. But understanding really well, what is your MBTI? And MBTI is Myers-Briggs. So understanding personality theory, and basically at my old company, or at Originate where I used to be, we did it for the entire company, and we did an activity with everyone to help us understand how each letter impacts each of us. I also did it when I managed GA with all the students to help them communicate better with each other. And I think a lot of people get hung up on it being a box, right? So don't put me in a box, I'm not just this one thing. And I think it's not about putting people in boxes. It's more just about understanding that people communicate differently, and it helps you get yourself in a different mindset. If this person is a thinker and you're a feeler, or vice versa, it helps you think of better ways to communicate with them and negotiate. And that's pinnacle to your job as PM. And then on the communication negotiation side, like I said, I read books in this area. In particular, Brene Brown is great with communication negotiation. And then on the active side, basically practicing outside of work. And I say this, and it's a little bit soft and fuzzy, but I learn a lot of these things and then I test them out on my boyfriend, or I test them out on my cousin, or I test them out on my family, right? So a lot of these negotiation strategies, I will create a project in my head, let's see if we can figure out a way for my boyfriend to put his clothes in the hamper. And I will try all these different negotiation strategies at home to test out how they might work. And then again, side projects and consulting. We've already talked about this before, but having a side project maybe with friends or with somebody from a previous company is going to help you get through a lot of negotiation issues. Trying to start consulting firm with my friends. I've tried a lot of these, done a lot of consulting work with my friends on the side, and it has been basically a example or a test of my ability to communicate, my ability to negotiate. And those are very different than in the workplace. A lot of times the workplace is a little more tame, right? We don't share a lot of our thoughts. We're not as invested in our work, and we don't let ourselves kind of push that limit. So doing it outside of work will help you understand that a lot better. And then lastly, the third category is the craft of product management. And as far as passive learning goes, a lot of PMs that I know are huge fans of blogs and influencers when it comes to continue learning for product. That's not the way that I learn as much. There are a lot of articles I will read here and there, but mostly how I read or how I learn is a few that I have listed here. So the first one is structuring work product to be more collaborative. And that's sort of like a little bit nebulous, so I'll talk a little bit about what that means. How many of you know a bit about writing user stories? How many of you have written user stories before? Yeah, quite a few. Okay. And have you written your user stories straight into the project management tool you're using? No. Great. Where are you writing them? On a paper. Okay. Where are you writing them? Okay. How about you? Okay. And are you typically getting them reviewed by other people? Great. Okay. Excellent. So what I try to do, I'm going to close this for just a second. So one of the things I do is what we call an epic workbook, and I'm just going to show an example of this. I try to collaborate on everything. I try to basically outline what is work product for a PM. So a lot of times PMs are doing this and that and this and that, and there isn't like a specific work product that comes out of a product manager's job. Whereas a designer has like their designs. An engineer has, their code. What is the actual work product for a PM? Could be a whole bunch of different things. But one of those things that's pretty consistent is their stories. And typically, most PMs I know will write their stories directly into the project management tool they're using. So whether it's Jira or it's Pivotal Tracker or it's Trello, and any PM that's ever worked for me, that's been an absolute rule that they not do that. And I've always told them, look, if you feel like you can write them all perfectly the first time, write them straight into the project management tool. If you don't, then let's not write them in there. So we use something that looks like this, which looks a little bit daunting, and I wish someone would actually build me a tool, or I could just build it myself. Basically, it says like who wrote it, what the number it is, the story title, the user story, and the acceptance criteria, and then all of the items that go along with it. And you'll see here that there's a reviewer's comments and tweaks column, which basically when I review the ticket, I will write comments here, which these have all been reviewed, so there isn't really a comment, but here there'll be outstanding questions or edits. And I will sit with the PMs and I will work on the acceptance criteria with them and the user story, and we'll edit them. So this will go through a round of review with myself as well as with the leads of the other teams. So I will show the engineering lead these tickets before they go into the project management tool. We'll also show the designer. So what Google Sheets allows me to do is make the process of writing stories collaborative, which also makes them easy to review. It makes it very easy and open and transparent for people to provide review for you. The other thing that I find really important is the story titles, or what we call stubs, are way more important than the actual criteria that goes inside of them. So most of the time we'll go through 3 or 4 rounds of how we break out those stubs before we put them into that project management tool. So that's just one thing. I try to make my processes as easy to review as possible and have collaboration, which basically helps us to review. The other thing is I use what's called an epic kickoff document. So at the beginning of an epic, a PM has to distribute this work product at a meeting. It has a structure, and it basically has, what's the user's problem, what's the background of the problem, what are the features that are needed for this, as well as the metrics that are needed to be tracked in the discussion. So there is actually a work product here that can be reviewed and is reviewed in the meeting by, designers, engineers, as well as other PMs. So that's structuring work product to be more collaborative. And then identifying and cultivating product mentors. So I kind of want to stop and ask, how many of you feel like you have a product mentor? Most of you are here at a product event. Would you say you have a product mentor? Anybody feel like they do? No? Wow, okay. So I'd love to talk about, I think I have a slide later on, to be honest, but maybe we'll get to that. But there's a lot of, I would say the number one thing you should get yourself when you're trying to be a PM is a product mentor, like somebody who you believe in their process. And that's the key point here. I've met a lot of product managers in my day, and I've spent time with them, but I don't really necessarily believe in their process. And product is such an open, wild, wild west where people can have different processes. They can have different philosophies and beliefs as a PM. So finding someone who you want to be like, who you really look up to their process is going to be, in my opinion, the best thing you can do for your transition to product. And then the next one is shadowing other PMs, which is a great way to identify and cultivate mentors. And if you work at a company that has other PMs, I would definitely identify them and then shadow them. And that's tricky, obviously, like if you have to do your work or you have to do your job. Some jobs are flexible with that. And they're like, if you ask your boss or you talk to management, you say, it's really important for us, like at the job I'm at now, I've actually been made to observe and shadow other departments. So I've literally sat behind a salesperson while they've done their job. And that's been required. So it's something, if I asked, people would love that I was making that initiative. So that might be your job, or it might be that that's a little touchy and maybe people don't want to let you do that. In that case, I would go to the PM and ask them to spend some one-on-one time with you, walking you through their process, right? Shadowing other PMs is going to be a great way because I don't believe there's any way to know if a PM is good at what they do until you actually sit in on them doing what they do. And then the last one here is like switch jobs. And, that's an easy to say, not hard to do. But for instance, for myself at my last company, I felt like I wasn't learning anymore. So I left. So that's another way to keep learning. Okay, so then I'm going to break down and deep dive into a few of these. The structuring work product, which we kind of already talked about these. I didn't realize I had another slide for this. Okay, so maybe we'll talk about this since we were... Okay, so who's a good product mentor? In my opinion, a good product mentor is somebody whose philosophies include flexibility of process. Anybody who's too rigid in a process is going to be very specific, right? The more flexible they are, in my opinion, the more they understand that every team is different, and they're probably a little bit of a better PM, in my opinion. I would say a product manager that has solid project management skills, but that's not their primary objective, is going to be a great secondary, objective. And I think the most important thing with mentors is keeping them up to date on your current work. I know most of you, the new people, are you guys PMs? Are you a product manager?
I'm a
Project manager, got it. New person. What is your current position? A coordinator? Product coordinator. Got it, event marketing. And you said you're a project manager. Great, okay. So most of the people in the room are actually not PMs, but keeping product, basically if you're a product manager, when you become a product manager, it's going to be important to keep your product mentors up to date on your projects. That's going to be the most difficult part about continued mentorship once you've become a PM. So I have a few mentors, and it's hard because I go and I meet with them, and they don't know the whole context of the project I'm working on. And that becomes the most difficult barrier to me getting really deep and, nitty gritty feedback from them. So what I'll do is I'll constantly keep them up to date, regardless of whether I have a question or a problem. And if they're not, but I have a specific question, I will bring my computer with me and I will pull it out and I will send them the product and I will send them that document with all my stories in it. I will ask them specifically to review certain things, but it's curated by you. So the quality of the feedback you get back from a product mentor is 100% on you, right? And how you curate the experience. Because when people ask me for mentorship, I don't have time to curate an experience for them and ask them all the right questions. I want them to ask me the right questions, right? So that's kind of what gets into number 3 as well. And then we already talked about this. Set up a meeting and have them walk you through their process. And yeah, we already kind of talked about this. I'm going to stop here and see if there's any questions. Yeah.
We're talking about crossover skills.
Yeah.
So you're dealing with a lot of different fields, different teams.
Yeah.
Do you feel like you have to have the same level of confidence as say the design team? You understand their aptitude for design and engineering team? Do you feel like you have to be at the high level, or do you just have to have like a little bit of a mix of all?
I would say like if we were speaking about like basically like light experience, medium, and heavy, I would say in your expertise areas, you should be around the medium side. You should have a light understanding of every department. Like you should understand, you should be able to jump in as a junior salesperson or a junior marketing person or maybe not a junior dev. But you should be able to jump in and do that person's job maybe for a day with some guidance. On all of them, but on the ones you're gaining expertise in, I would say it should be medium. Like you could potentially go out and get a design contract and like kind of do that work yourself. Or you could potentially build an app on your own and probably have. Yeah? Any other questions at this point? Okay. So just lastly, like a little bit, I kind of talked about it a little bit here and there, but if it's helpful at all, like my personal learning strategy in these 3 areas for the crossover skills, I love the sketch together tutorials. So I basically just found a guy who does tutorials on YouTube that I love his strategy, I love his process. And I do these tutorials, maybe a few every weekend or something. I refresh my memory on them. I do side projects and consulting. So I like redesign my, dad's website, or I like design a website for a friend or something like that. And then, so my crossover skills are design and research because my background's in research. And I'll continue doing courses. Like IDOU has a lot of really great courses, and those give you credentials. And they're really interactive. So I like that. I don't like the very sort of didactic, classes that are more lecture based. And then obviously like meetings with mentors. So I have a few design mentors who I'll meet with pretty regularly. And then on the communication and negotiation side, like I said, I'll do teacher training programs, which seems a little bit out of left field, but I think it really helps with the communication and negotiation skills and personality sciences. So I'll read a lot of books in particular on personality science. And then, like I said, I'll test them out on like my family members and my friends. And then the craft of product management, I spend a lot of my time making my processes reviewable and like documenting them, and then having meetings with, I have basically just 2 really strong product mentors, and I meet with them, one of them very regularly, maybe like once every 2 weeks or so, and the other one maybe like once a month. And I'll come with like very specific questions, like, we're going to pull up this Google Analytics. We're going to look at this number. We're going to look at these tickets. I'm going to like think about the story of how quickly I'm going to get you up to speed beforehand. And we're going to come out of there with some solution, right? And then some blogs and articles, but I don't have any that like I really follow strongly. So at this point, like I kind of want you guys to share. You've shared a little bit of this stuff, but I'd love to hear from you guys. What's your learning strategy right now? It seems like most of you are sort of trying to transition into product. And if that's not the case, maybe tell me like what your relationship with product is. And then kind of what's your learning strategy so far and what's your objective? And maybe tell me your name and your learning strategy. Okay? We're going to go around. You want to start?
My name is Alec, and I am a software developer in .NET. I work for a company called Infosys. They're very large, mostly based out of India, but they have a pretty big American labor. I guess I want to go into project or product management fairly soon, so I'm down the road, so I'm here really just to learn.
Yeah.
When you talk about mentors, my PM is very sworn, so he has a ton of work that he already has. So it's not very realistic for me to see him as a mentor and add more to his plate.
Yeah.
So I guess my learning strategy is just to go to meetups, read and meet other project managers out there handling their work. Anything else?
Well, my question to you would be, have you found in the meetups kind of PMs that you have cultivated relationships with?
I just started this job in August, and I just moved here 2 months. This is my first month.
Oh, awesome. Great.
Yeah, so.
Excellent. Okay. Well, I would say that would be your number one thing is to kind of like, and it's it's just like anything. It's just like job searching. It's like dating. You have to like talk to like 10. Maybe you'll get like 2 that respond and 1 that's actually good, right? So I would focus on that. And it's going to be a lot harder for somebody who like doesn't have one at their company that they can like see what they're doing and that they like, if you feel like the PM you're working with is fantastic and you think they're really great and you look up to their process, I would see if you can find some small pockets of time they could spend with you. If not, then definitely trying to cultivate other mentors is going to be really important.
Actually, I have another question too.
Yeah.
Have you found that product or project managers usually come, especially in tech, usually come from engineering, or do they usually transfer from like business or sales and marketing? And that's how they get into tech.
It's usually, so I would say maybe 5 years ago, most of the PMs you would see were all previous engineers. Now I think you'll see a lot more coming from like design or data analytics or research from those areas. I don't see so much coming from like sales, maybe like definitely marketing. I see a lot coming into product. But I think it's changing a lot. You don't have to be technical anymore, and that's like a qualifier. So if you see positions, it'll say like technical PM, and then clearly you need to be technical. Yeah.
So I'm Ben. Hello. I'm the head of customer success for a small startup called WeCard. Now we're growing. It's in Budapest, Hungary, Europe, so far away from here. There are no PMs there specifically. We're a small team, and now we're growing. Before, like, the CEO and I were doing the PM stuff, but it wasn't very explicit. We were all doing all that we had to do. And my learning strategy is reading a lot of books, going to meetups, watching conference lectures, stuff like that. But I also want to find a mentor, and it's something, like I didn't have the opportunity to meet a lot of PMs. And my tips, I guess, would be to just start doing whatever makes you feel scary, and then you can.
Yeah, that's totally true. How about you?
Hey, my name is Jacob Sussman. I'm a project manager at an agency where I oversee projects ranging from creative development to media trafficking through data analysis teams. I'm really interested in product design, and I think that's why I'm interested in transitioning to product management. I don't have any product managers currently, but I think that was like one of the best suggestions I've heard at an event like this. You should really seek out those relationships. My learning strategy so far has largely been to figure out which domains of knowledge a product manager needs to understand that I don't have much experience with, that on which in particular can get to this data. And reading the book on Agile, for example, is something very specific framework. Yeah, basically targeting those domains specifically.
That's great. And you said you don't actually have a product mentor yet. Do you have product managers at your job?
There are project managers who work on the UX team specifically, and I think I might.
Yeah. Yeah, that'd be great. Okay.
I'm slowly transitioning into product design, but right now I'm a visual designer for data staff, which is really different from
Yeah.
Yeah, so there are no PMs in data staff. But I have a background in research and design, so I'm really curious. And for me, what has been really helpful for learning has been listening to a lot of podcasts. There's one called Intercom. They do a lot of like different, they invite a lot of different product designers and like head of products to their podcast. It's really interesting. I also read a lot of Medium articles. There's so many.
What was the podcast?
It's by a company called Intercom. Yeah. And another thing that is really helpful is that LinkedIn has a new feature called Career Insights, in which you can select what industries you're interested in, and whether or not you'd like to meet the next person, or if they can be far away, if it's in the country or not. And you can actually get like a list of 3 different potential mentors. It's like a curated list. Basically.
That's cool. I didn't know.
Yeah. And so through that, I've actually been able to meet some PMs. But so this is actually a question for you. I met some PMs who are in ad strategy, and another PM who was at LinkedIn doing content.
Yeah.
And so you talk a lot about like aligning PM strategies with what you envision your strategy to be like.
Yeah.
What if that sort of industry that they come from is so vastly different from what you're interested in?
Yeah, I mean, that's also difficult, and there's a lot of different areas of being a PM, which I didn't really get into in this conversation, but in my mind, the lines are drawn at agency and in-house, and then when you go in-house, you've got like basically a lot in-house, depending on the size of the company, their skill sets will vary, right? So like the larger the company, more specialized. So you'll see like search and discovery product managers, like blockchain product manager, right? Like very specific content product manager, marketing product manager, right? So they have those areas and they really are just sort of like niche in that. So I would say like you got to think about where you want to go and get as specific as you can without, trying to find a needle in a haystack. There's a lot of processes that are agnostic of what they're doing, right? So how they manage, epics and roadmaps and how they write stories and how they negotiate and communicate with each other and how they keep up their crossover skills are going to be pretty much the same, but there are going to be some specifics, like when you get into the nitty gritty and you actually become a PM and you want to go to them and ask them for their advice, there might be some stuff that might be different for them. So I would say like try your hardest. And I would say try and get at least one or two. Two is ideal, two really good product mentors so that you can diversify a little bit. Like you can say, there's one I think is really great at this, and then there's this other one I think is really great at this. And it takes time. It's like it's one of the most difficult pieces of, being a product manager, and being a product manager that continues to learn and grow and get better is going to be identifying those PMs and keeping them and learning from them. Because if you don't, you just stay the same PM. You're going to get different experiences, but anything that for you is going to need challenging, is going to need pushing. Most people are not going to push you to be a better PM because typically there's only one PM on a project. And that's another thing. Like if your company does co-PMing, or if you have the opportunity to co-PM with another PM, and even if you're not a PM, but you are moving into product and there is a PM, you could always, ask, depending on how flexible your work is, to co-PM with a PM. And that is one of the greatest ways to learn. So, yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So if a PM is tied to a specific product in an industry, do you think oftentimes they're pigeonholed to that industry? Because that's what I often see.
Yeah, I do. And I mean, that's a struggle for, I'm assuming, most PMs. So my background is I spent 1 year in industry, so specific on the actual product side. So I worked at Cornerstone, and then I spent the last 3 years in agency. So moving from agency back to like in-house is much more difficult. Going the other way is not as hard. Going from in-house to agency is not as hard. And that's something that you'll always have the opportunity to do. So I would say like, do the in-house piece first. Like if I would go back, I would have like gone in-house first and then come over to the agency side. But what agency gives you is breadth. It's really your choice. It's breadth of knowledge or depth of knowledge. So.
Do you think there's a merit definition to that? Depth of knowledge, other than after that product?
It depends on what you want your story to be. I wanted a multi-dimensional story, and I wanted to be in-house eventually in the end. Maybe at some point I'll go back to agency, but I felt like I couldn't do my job at agency well enough without more experience in-house. So I think it depends on your own story. Why don't you intro yourself too after you're done asking? Yeah. We'll just go to yeah. 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 Okay. So agency means that you work at a firm that you're working on a different project every few months. So where I used to work, for a few months, I'd be working on a project for Cummins, the engine company. So we were building fleet management software. And then 6 months from them, I'd be working on Cricket Media, building reading software for kids. And then a few months from then, I was working on reinsurance software, SaaS software. So it's completely different product, like maybe one is mobile, maybe one is web, different client entirely. And what that means is you're just getting like a narrow view of what you're either building something from scratch, which is a very different strategy. Like building something from scratch is very different than iterating on an existing piece of software. So when you're an in-house PM, the product's already built, right? Like it's built, it's moving, it's working, people are using it. And you're just looking, you have access to a lot of quantitative data, whereas like when you're working at an agency, you don't, because you're typically building things from scratch. So it's a vastly different skill set between agency and in-house. Yeah, so it's like working at IDEO versus working at, or like Huge versus working at Facebook. Right?
Are there programs for entry-level PMs that you heard are particularly valuable as, in terms of
like learning?
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, product school is the first one I've ever heard of that's like, and I mean, I used to work at GA, and GA had a PMI program that was full-time, and now they have an evening program. And I mean, we've hired 2 PMs at my last company from GA and 1 from product school, so both of those 2 seem like they're pretty good. I've never taken them myself. Yeah.
Asking so much about educational programs as companies that have an associate PM program.
Oh.
Yeah, so I think that's something I really appreciated in my first job.
Yeah.
Just, feeling like I'm part of a framework that really helps me build the necessary skills on the job.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I don't. I don't know of too many that have associate PM positions, but it is a hard position to find. I would say, and this is how when I went from my position at Cornerstone was product manager. When I went over to Originate, I became a QA manager first. And I personally think that if there's a good QA department, and what I mean by that, it's not a testing department, it's a quality assurance department, which are very different. That could be a whole nother talk entirely. But if it's a QA department, QA is a really great way into product. An agency is a really great way into product. Like if you can't, I think it's harder to find a job in-house as your first job, but probably better for the early career to be in-house. So that's like kind of opposite, right? I mean, depending on what your story is. Does that make sense? Let me go around still so I hear everyone's story, and then I'll come back. Go ahead. How about you?
So my name is Daniel. I work in asset management, product management, so I think it's a little bit different from what everyone else here is doing. So our products are funds and exchange-traded funds.
Yeah.
So it's been a bit of a challenge for the last couple of years because my job has been to really kind of learn how the products are functioning while working with much more kind of senior product managers that really understand everything from the ground up. Like we have product management guys that have been around since ETFs were created, so they have 20 years experience, like they get this stuff inside out. It's a little bit challenging, but in terms of learning, it's been all about kind of working with them as much as possible. But also, one of the things I discovered is that I actually get my most valuable experiences just going out into the field and interviewing at different places and sitting down with other product managers that will kind of sit down and lay out their entire product strategy, and they'll talk about their product development and how they think about everything from beginning to end, how they go into their consumer strategy, the types of research they're doing, the types of things that they're doing. And it's incredibly exciting because you almost kind of, you might realize weaknesses in your own platform, but you might also realize weaknesses in their platform from kind of a competitive perspective. Yeah. You almost realize, like, hey, they think this thing is great, but they're actually 20 years behind the market on this one thing. They think it's bad. Yeah. But this has been going on for 20 years. Yeah. No, that's great. That's awesome. And what are you hoping, like, do you have a career move you're trying to make, or you're just trying to, like, get more senior, realm as the senior PMs that you're working with right now? I'm a bit unclear on that because I'm trying to understand where the market for product managers in finance is actually going. Yeah. But there's also kind of a track into business intelligence, and a track into marketing. So there are a lot of other interesting things. There's so much fintech right now. So there's a lot of opportunity, and it's a very niche area. So if you have that industry experience, like mentioned, you are gold. So, there's a lot of opportunity for product managers for fintech specifically. So that's a really great place to be.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Siri. I work for a managed company that explains $5 performance today. Yeah, but before, like I just graduated from NYU, and then I looked
Congrats.
for a lot of specific roles. But right after college, even I realized that unless you have a lot of experience, unless you are a developer, like it's very difficult to get calls for PM. So that's why, but there are some roles, the one that I'm currently working on, which is similar to a product manager, but it's not totally called a product manager. So I thought of like building my career through it. Also, since I started working at my full-time job, I really didn't get to learn as much as I did when I was in college. So that's
Yeah.
why I'm here.
Yeah.
So,
And remind me what your title is right now?
I'm an associate, so the kind of work that I do is both PM and business analyst.
Yeah.
So
Great.
basically requirement gathering, understanding the product.
It's great.
Probably it's not called a product management, but yeah. The work that
Great.
I do is similar to that. But I don't have to interact with marketing and things like that. I just interact with business and engineering.
Okay. Yeah, I would say typically the better product managers, the beginning of their career was not spent in product. I only know a few PMs who are pure PMs, which is what I call it. It's not like a term or anything. It's just what I call it. But it's like that's all they've done. That's their entire career. They've started as a PM, they ended as a PM. And that's very rare. And I think they actually have to work a little bit harder. Whereas if you think about your trajectory as going into product as requiring some pre-work in something else, the narrative will feel a little bit better and it makes a lot more sense. So you have to come into being a product manager with empathy. That's going to be your number one skill set as a PM. And you can't build empathy if you've never been in the shoes of any of the other people that you're helping manage. And that's really why I say QA is a really great place to come from, because QA has to have empathy for everyone. And so that's a really great place to start if you do. The other great place is side projects. Like, I've seen so many. The one PM we hired straight out of college. Sorry, this is very weird. My hand is cramping. The one PM that we hired at Originate straight out of college, she had created an app in college and was PMing it in college, and that was like and we hired her as a QA manager with the hopes that eventually she would move into product. So I would say side projects, as well as having like an expertise in another area that you can build a narrative around. Like, it's all about the story you tell about your transferable skills. And that skill of telling that story is going to be what people are looking for as a PM, like that you can tell that story. Yeah. Go ahead.
Hi everyone, currently I work at a media agency in analytics department. I'll talk to you more about it.
Yeah.
My day-to-day work is very dynamic because I have one big client, so when they want to make the campaign happen, I have to do reporting, monitoring the whole campaign processes. So for me, we work with a lot of data partners. I think it's a little bit like product management. You work with different vendors, and so I actually got pulled into this thing. I'm not going to shift my job now, but I think it's an interesting direction to go later.
Yeah, that's great. Well, thank you for coming.
Actually, I'm stacking program manager, program manager, and I work for a large technology outsourcing company. So we continue getting more and more requests from our clients to staff product management roles. That's why I'm part of the storage and what does it mean? Because as far as you can see, this is pretty new term. And many people who are currently doing product management, they came from business analysis, QA, project manager, and engineering. That's why I just wanted to understand what's the line, how can we draw this line and understand who who can jump in and who's the best fit for those roles. So maybe in future I will switch to product management as well. But nature of my job just to understand who is the best fit.
That's great. And back here, you're a little new, so let us know name and kind of this stuff.
My name is Monica. My job title is BA Business Analyst. I work in a strategic company called RB, which just carry all the products like brands and accessories and stuff. But the first time I heard about product manager is because now I'm working in this compliance project doing GDPR compliance. And my role is basically to make sure in the digital assets on the website, mobile apps, campaign pages, to make sure they're capturing data in the right way.
Yeah.
I don't know how many PMs are in my company because we're pretty global. But the PM I'm working with, one based in UK, one based in Poland, they are all product manager of websites, applications.
Yeah, great.
Learning strategy. I never thought about getting into product manager before.
Okay.
And then I got in close work relationship with my product manager and found it pretty interesting. We got to know a lot of stuff that's pretty like overall in the company rather than really specific areas.
Yeah.
So I want to know more about it. My learning strategy that's just join some cultures and meet more people, talk to people,
Yeah.
read some books and stuff.
That's okay. Just.
I put my friend over here. She
Yeah. It's okay. And lastly.
Hi, I'm Alex. I mentioned earlier, I'm working with Leia for an all-electrician. It's been the past 3 years now. One story recently, we just got rid of like 18 video companies and that is kind of not just one kind of good thing. We know it's in the company.
Okay.
But I know very little product management, except that I feel like the difference between what I do and what product manager would do is I follow templates and best practices versus them trying to create, I assume here. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's an interesting distinction. Like product managers do follow templates and processes. We also have to create them at times. But I think I mentioned earlier is one of the best, I think better PMs have flexibility of process. So I think a PM has to like adapt their process or the process to the team, to the needs. And the other objective of a PM is if there is a hole in a process, they fill that hole. So that's why there has to be, they basically have to like be able to do a little bit of everything. So if there's no marketing team, the PM will do the marketing. If they, if you're really small, a lot of times PM might jump in and do sales. They might sit in on sales calls. They might do customer service. They might design. A lot of times it's product managers are both product managers and designers. If they are previous engineers, they might code and be a PM. So typically that product manager is like, a lot of times you'll hear the term the CEO of the project. And so that's typically the role they're playing, which they do use. They need to establish processes, but it's not the core piece of their work the way like a project manager would. Like project manager is like, it's your job to like create processes, manage them, develop them, keep them running. And that's just a piece of what a product manager does. Yeah. Cool. Okay. Questions? Any other questions? Yeah.
I don't know if you have the answer. Have you thought about like exit strategies for down the road as a product manager? What are common other things they go into? Or is it always product management, just different?
That's a great question. Product managers a lot of times become CEOs and founders, so it's a pretty common move.
There's only so many CEOs and so many companies.
Yeah, and then a lot of times, so basically there's two routes. My mentor will typically say you either can become a CEO or start your own thing, or you become an expert in your craft. So you'll become like a product leader, like a director or SVP of product, and you're basically a thought leader. You're helping to like set up that piece of companies. Maybe you're a product advisor. So those are like the higher level, things you could be working towards.